Go ahead. Nothing coming home.
Good afternoon, everybody. Yep,
Okay, sorry.
that's okay. So, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our Design Review Board meeting, Monday, July 15th. We have regrets from Aaron Stavard. Now, he says he may be along a little bit later, so he may join us later. And Mary Nicholson is on the line. Mary, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Thank you, Elena.
Wonderful, thank you. And welcome, folks, here, and I'll call the meeting to order. Any declaration of conflicts? Seeing none, can I have an approval of the agenda? Moved by Jackie, seconded by Brian. All those in favor? Thank you. Can I have an adoption of the minutes from April 15th, 2024? Okay, moved by Brian, seconded by anyone? Jackie? Okay. Any business arising from those minutes? Seeing none, we have two reports this evening. So we'll start with Report A, 149, 151 Great George Street. And Brian Gundrum is here, our manager, to give a report. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair Yankoff. I'll just wait for the presentation to load there. Great. Chair, members of the Design Review Board, the following application is a request that concerns property addressed as 149, 151 Great George Street, PID numbers 342386 and 342402. This design review application also relates to a related site-specific exemption request under the Zoning and Development Bylaw, which is a request for relief from zoning requirements to allow for an 8-story, 85-unit apartment building on the subject property that would have ground floor space, and the development would be subject to the bonus height requirements of the Zoning and Development Bylaw. Subject property is shown here at the southwest corner of Kent Street and Great George Street. Again, the two parcels addressed as 149 and 151 Great George Street. Again, site-specific exemption is intended to replace the existing 2-story commercial building on the subject property with an 8-story, 85-unit apartment building having ground floor commercial space. As shown here, these are the concept 3D renderings that the proponents have provided to the city, and were also part of the design review package that the third-party design reviewer provided evaluation on with respect to design review requirements. Next slide, this is just for board's information, a summary of the zoning relief that's being sought under the related site-specific exemption request. 4 points of relief relating to lot frontage, lot depth, building step back due to the bonus height provisions that apply to the development, as well as relief from the interior yard setback that would be toward the backs of the building. Again, site context, the property is located on the southwest corner of the intersection of Great George Street and Kent Street, is located within the downtown core zone adjacent to established commercial and mixed-use residential uses. Subject property contains a 2-story commercial building containing office and business uses that has been present on the site for a number of years. Just an overview, planning staff's perspective on the application. The proposed change of use from entirely commercial at the current time to contain primarily residential use in a higher density format is in general agreement with the applicable policies and objectives of the official plan for the downtown core land use designation. Proposed change of use, while it would displace an existing commercial space in the downtown core, would offer opportunity to house more residents being in close proximity to existing amenities, and would offer synergies to support existing established commercial businesses in the immediate area. It is noted, as previously, that a new commercial space component is proposed for the development, so while there would be a net loss of commercial space, there would still be a new commercial space provided into the future. And the official plan does support creation of high-density residential uses in the downtown core on a property such as this, and also promotion of mixed residential and commercial uses on the same site. With respect to the design review process, The proposed building height of 31.5 meters or 8 stories in the downtown triggers the bonus height provisions of the zoning and development bylaw under section 3.12, bonus height applications, and through that, it also triggers the design review process. The location of the building within the 500 lot area also triggers the design standards for the 500 lot area under section 7 of the zoning and development bylaw through the design review process. The applicants have submitted a design package which contained facade drawings shown on the left, elevation drawings shown in the middle, as well as a site plan for the proposed apartment development. With respect to section 3.14.3, design review process of the zoning and development bylaw, the design package received by the city was forwarded to a third-party design reviewer to conduct a review of the proposed development for conformity with the intent of the zoning and development bylaw, including the design standards for the 500 lot area and the criteria for evaluation for design review. The design reviewer subsequently provided the city with recommendations as follows with regard to building expression and materials and architecture, along with an overall summary statement for the development, which is on the subsequent slides. So, first recommendation of the third-party design reviewer with regard to building expression, quoting from the design reviewer, recommendation is provide a stronger contrast of material and visual break between the building base and middle portion, similar to what has already been achieved at the top 2 levels. The Holman Grand Hotel predates the bylaw requirements, exists within the same city block, stands 10 stories tall, and carries a similar condition as suggested with this development. It does not carry a step back at the 3rd floor level. However, it is successful in design by clearly identifying the scale of the lower streetscape with its contrasting veneers from a masonry base to a full metal-cladded body and recessed top floor. And recommendation number 2 from the design reviewer regarding materials and architectural quality, recommended explore the possibility of focusing the traditional red brick to the base and below the extruded black cornice line. The 3rd to 6th floor could exist in a contrasting metal siding or panel system, or with a different color and scale of brick if masonry is desired. And this leads to the summary statement that the design reviewer provided in terms of their evaluation. Based on the assumption the requested variances and site-specific exemptions are approved by planning, it is my opinion that the overall design is generally of good quality and an appropriate infill project that warrants consideration. Coupled with the City of Charlottetown's great need for rental units, the development's approval will provide 85 much-needed residents to the downtown core. Furthermore, it should the applicant and design review committee consider the recommendations put forward in this report, specifically in regard to type and siding allocation to help the building base feel more relatable to the scale and height of the existing streetscape, I would recommend the planning board and council consider it for approval. Which leads to our concluding staff recommendation that the Planning and Heritage Department encourages Design Review Board to approve the proposed building facade plans for the proposed 8-story, 85-unit apartment building located at 149-151 Great George Street, PID numbers 342386 and 342402 in the downtown core DC zone, as per the design reviewer's recommendations. Furthermore, the design review board's recommendation will be forwarded to the planning board, outlining their assessment of the site-specific exemption and design. So that is a summary of the design reviewer's comments, staff recommendation, and overall overview of the proposed development. So I'll turn it back over to the chair, and thank you for any questions you may have.
Thank you for your presentation. Do anyone here have any questions? Go ahead, Councillor Beck.
Yeah, thank you for that, Dave. I just have a few questions. Page 18. There was a question about the proposed parking for the development would be located at existing off-site downtown parking facilities through existing legal agreement. So we have 85 units. How many units would be assigned for parking, and where would those parking locations be off-site?
So thank you for that question, Councillor Beck. It's an excellent question. That question is more pertains to when this comes back to planning board, and we discuss it there, because today, our only discussion is about the actual design. Correct me if I'm wrong on process, but we're just here for the design component of this. David, is that correct?
Through the chair, that is correct, that the scope of the board is just to consider the aspects that have been evaluated by the design reviewer and the design review criteria. So,
Great, thank you. And the great thing is that this comes back to planning board, so all of those other questions will come up at planning
Okay.
board.
All
Yeah,
right, so I have one question
Go
about,
ahead.
Dave, can you go back on your slide there?
Sorry, Councillor Beck, can I just interrupt for one sec? So just to say though, I think what we're being asked to do is to talk about the site-specific.
no, no,
No,
what
that's
we're.
nothing to do with it.
The design review board reviews the independent design reviewer's recommendations and looks at what staff is recommending based on that, and we have to decide whether or not we accept staff's recommendation that they recommend that we accept the design components of this project based on the two recommendations that the design reviewer has put forward. And so that's what we're here tonight to do. Nothing to do with the
Okay.
site-specific. That will all come into play when it comes back through the planning planning board in the weeks
Okay.
to come.
Because I had questions about the parking too, really in just the sense of like, we're being asked to sort of say, look at this 85 unit. And so it kind of, I guess, impacts your overall thinking about it. And the design probably impacts the number of units. So I know the parking in particular is maybe not ours, but it was something for me as well. Because there's no parking in it, right? There's no parking in this building.
No. I'm going to have David just clarify again the role of the design review board.
Yeah, through the chair and Councillor Beck and Member Nicholson, those are good questions that you raise. However, they are outside the scope of the design review board. And again, there's been extra details provided in my presentation and the report as well, and that's just purely for context. But in terms of the scope of what design review board is here today to make a decision on, it's really to render a decision on the design reviewer's recommendation that concern exterior facade designs for the building and only that. Any other information was provided just for additional context on the overall development. As the chair mentioned, there will be recommendation coming forward to planning board and then a consideration by council for further review, discussion, and for a vote on the overall development. Yeah.
So, Madam Chair, just in a point of order, Section 2.4 of the zoning development bylaw, there is your design review board. The duty of the design review board is to make recommendations to council and/or the development officer with regards to the review of applications subject to the design review process. That's what we're doing right now. It's right it's in our zoning development bylaw. Thank you.
Thank you
So
for that.
I do have a question about the
Yes.
facade.
Yeah, you go ahead, Councillor Beck.
So David, can you go back to your, I think it might be the second recommendation? Yeah, there we go. So the third to sixth floor could exist in a contrasting metal siding panel system or with a different color and scale of brick if masonry is desired. So if I think of, take the Homer Grand, for example, it's kind of brick in the bottom, and then it has a metal siding up to the top. Is that what that's proposing here?
Through the chair, Councillor Beck.
I don't know, I don't quite understand.
Yeah.
So I'm just looking for,
Yeah, I think what the design reviewer is intending here is that if I go back to the images of the building, actually, I'm going to grab the bigger version here. Well, a little bigger. What they're getting at is that they're recommending that as a possibility, the third to sixth floors, instead of having masonry finish like the two the first and second stories do closer to the street level, that there could be additional differentiation or articulation by using a different material on these middle floors to break up the building, to give more contrast and more emphasis to the street level floors. And that's really what they're saying as a possibility here in that in the recommendation. Yeah, to provide a visual break between the building base and middle portion. And again, it's getting at this idea that as a possibility, the board may consider that different materials be used further up to provide a visual contrast so that you have more emphasis on those street level floors at the pedestrian level.
Okay, I get that. So the options for that contrast is either the metal siding panel or a different color and scale of brick.
Correct, yeah.
Okay, so do we have to choose one or the other? Or do we have to approve one or the other? Or what do we have to do with that recommendation?
Well, it's up to the board whether the design reviewers offer these as options that the board can adopt, or the board, it's basically like take it or leave it. The board could approve the design as provided by the proponents shown here, or accept the recommendations of the design reviewer that pointed at providing some additional articulation through some minor design changes to the facade. The bulk and scale and massing of the building would remain the same. There's be no changes to the physical extents of the building, anything of the sort. It's really just some recommendations that recommended a difference in how the facade and the skin of the building would appear to the outside.
And just before you do, I think procedurally they can comment, can they not, David?
Well, I was going to ask if they could.
Yeah, it's
through-
fine with me, so if it's
I
fine
was
with.
going to say through the chair, it's at your discretion whether to allow.
It is,
members to
then it's
speak.
perfectly fine with me. But just to build on Councillor Beck's question before these folks respond, your recommendation is for us to accept the design reviewers' recommendations to encompass into that. So if that's the case, where's the checks and balances? If we say, if this board says, yes, we accept staff's recommendation, which is to encompass in these design reviewers' recommendations, at what point is there a checks and balances that actually happens, or what is the process? What will happen? Go ahead.
So, through the chair, Chair Yankoff, the answer to that is that we are compelled, or the proponents, the developers are compelled to enter into a development agreement. There would be future schedules to that agreement that would confirm the design as approved through the design review process. So the development agreement would hold the developer to whatever that approved design looks like in the future. And any amendments to that approved design would have to go back through the process again if there's any proposed changes after the fact, so.
Thank you. And before I turn it over to you folks, but this board would not have to meet again. If they accept staff's recommendation, we don't have to meet again unless they want to come back through the process and not accept the recommendations. Is that correct?
Well, I'll say this, if, at this juncture, if there's a difference between what the staff have recommended and what the design review board votes on or confirms, that we have to defer to council to make a decision in that case. If there's a discrepancy between what we recommend, or what the design reviewer has recommended, which we're agreeing with, and what the design review board chooses to do, then we have to bring this up to council to make a final call on it. Otherwise, if you're in agreement with staff, which is what the design reviewer has recommended, it stops here, and it just, that would have to be then confirmed through that future development agreement. So, yeah.
Great. Thank you. Do you want to follow up before we turn it over to these folks?
Yeah, well, I'm still not clear what I'm being asked to approve here. Whether I'm being asked to approve that picture there, that's up on the screen, which is the original submission from the proponents, or are we looking at taking recommendation 2 and changing the facade by putting in either metal siding or different color and scale of brick. What are you recommending, David?
Well, through the chair, staff, Councillor Becker, recommending that we approve with the proposed recommendations of the design reviewer, which does open it up to changes having to be made to match the recommendations. So the exterior appearance of the building would look a bit different between the third and sixth stories as per what the design reviewer has recommended here. If that makes sense.
Well, who's going to make that decision?
Well, it'd be an operational decision negotiated between staff and the developer in this case, so.
Does the developer have to take this recommendation? I'm sorry, I'm still not clear.
So,
They may choose, I guess I'm just sitting here, and I don't know what they're thinking. That's why I'd like to hear from them, because I don't know whether, like, I quite like the building. I think that when I looked at it, I said, the building looks fine. I can see what the Robert Haggis is talking about in terms of contrast. If we're going to get in contrast, I'd like the contrast to look good. And I'd like the contrast to be value added, better than what's presented there, so. That's just what I'm trying to.
I'm just going to ask Brian has a comment to make, and before I make any more comments, over to you, Brian.
Just two comments.
Right side.
Two comments. The first one is the presentation that was initially submitted. In dealing with any urban design decision, context is a very important element to be brought into the discussion. And both of the renderings that are shown show very oblique presentation of massing. And in fact, I've worked in this profession for, I dare say, too many years. And I have to do a fair bit of creative infill to really get a sense of the scale of the building and its relationship to the two streetscapes, Great George Street and Kent Street. And that's just very important when it comes to the Great George streetscape, because if you look at the rendering that is on the top, that ends in Great George Street, what is sitting at that juncture is Province House. It may be obscured right now with plywood and scaffolding, but nonetheless, that streetscape has tremendous historic value. I'm not saying that that would make a final decision unnecessary, but the fact that there's nothing here for the broad cross-section of the people who are sitting in this room looking at the design to cue into the issues of scale, character, materials, textures, fenestration, it's totally lacking. And I just make that comment that staff, when they bring a presentation to council for a public meeting, or if they're taking it to planning board or any other initiative, there should be some guidance given to what is a minimum level of information. We are dealing with a complex set of bylaws when it comes to form-based architecture. And it's not simply enough to say that the building's height and its meets and bounds have been met. We're dealing with context and texture. That's my lecture. I can't change what's in front of us today. It's here. The second part is when we employ a design reviewer to provide the critical advice to guide this board in making a decision. It should not be an either or option. And the fact that we are here today with an or, which I agree with Councillor Beck, that we do not know what the final building is going to look like because of that one conjunction put between the two phrases. So that's leaving it up to council now, if they're going to go through the site-specific decision-making. I can't sort of judge what could be interpreted from that. I know one thing, that in metal siding, there's so many different levels of composition to metal siding, and so many different impacts in terms of budgets, that it can leave it wide open in terms of a design decision because of how the design review process was not brought to a clear conclusion. I think the only way we can get to the final answer is to request the applicant to state clearly what their intent is. And quite frankly, what was presented initially, we could talk all day about what is scale and interpretation of what I might want to do with the building versus what someone else might. I think it's important, though, this is an important project, that we try to get a decision made here today so that we can move forward if possible and not have councillors left sort of with an assumption. It should be very clear. And again, we may have jumped the gun to get this to this point rather quickly, so we should not be hasty in terms of allowing that to become justification for a poor decision.
Thank you for that, Brian. David, do you have any comments before we turn this over to the folks? And just in terms of process, and just following up with what Councillor Beck has said, as well as Brian Gillis on the design process, can you just remind the board, I mean, there's questions now being asked about what decisions can be made today. But can you just remind us again? I know the mayor just quoted it pretty clearly from the zoning and development bylaw, but there just seems to be a bit of confusion, which there always is at this level. Yeah.
Through the chair, to try and address that as best I can. So the design review board is tasked with making a decision on the accepted design of the building. In this case, they're really focusing on the exterior facades, because those are the only elements or features of the building that we receive professional comments for. So it's either we accept the design as put forward by the proponents, as shown on the renderings on the screen, or we accept the design reviewer's comments in this case and ask that there be alterations made to the facades of the building in keeping with the design reviewer's recommendations. So that's really the scope of the decision that's being asked for today. So.
And so this board will, if we accept staff's recommendation, this board won't meet again on the changes, the proposed changes that the design reviewer has put forward. That will just end up at council at the very final decision around the site-specific and all the other, like the site-specific exemption request for this project. Is that correct?
That's correct, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, I'm going to turn it over to you folks if you want to make any comments before we circle back to this again. Sure.
Good afternoon, everyone. Your worship, members of council, members of planning and heritage, and members of the public. If you can go back to the slide with the exterior here, but just to give you a little overview of how we approach the design here is a couple of things that we did consider highly when developing building this tall, or 8 stories. We did want to express the verticality of it, just to visually break up the massing of the building, as it is pretty wide, facing Kent Street and Great George. We also wanted to respect the materiality, i.e. brick, as it is a very prominent material all around town. Scale, in terms of respecting the streetscape and the overall context of the streetscape, especially along Great George. And we wanted to respect the fact that this is a very prominent parcel in the city, and this will get a lot of people looking this way. So early on, we did want the approach of having the brick go up to the sixth story before we made that material change of glazing and that fin and that canopy on the top two floors. Just because we wanted to break that massing and express that verticality. I guess if you want a bit of a peg there, and if you go to the buildings in New York and Manhattan, you would see that sort of the language of where you have punch-out windows, then you've got slits of brick, panels of brick, breaking that up, and we took our cues from that. And that's been pretty much the ongoing intent of the exterior here. But one of the major changes to the original design was the dark gray cornice line that goes across Great George and Kent, and that's on account of respecting the streetscape and the datum going across Great George Street. But otherwise, this has been the original intent of the building, and we would prefer to keep with this. We believe that it has a really strong and interesting character, and it will add to the character of the city moving forward. And we did respect the storefront experience, a storefront / pedestrian experience along the corner there, and as part of that character being a thing in the city, we are keeping that. And that's all I have to say for now. Thank you.
So some of the comments I have to make, if you just expand on what JV said. So that black datum line you see part way up, originally our drawings showed the columns, the brick columns, right from the street to the top of the sixth floor. As a result of some comments from the design reviewer, we actually put that datum line in to respond to his comments. And so we do feel very strongly that we would really propose that the design review board accept the design as we are presenting it, and not to muddy the water with what if going in the future. This is particularly our owner is really fond of this design, really feels that it's making a significant investment in the city. We did explore doing some metal on that top section. That wasn't anything that was acceptable to ownership. So I would say, particularly in view, Philip, I mentioned about you telling the story about the home in Grand. It's ironic that originally that was going to have brick all the way up. And then if you remember, there was a big storm ensued when it was decided to go to metal. So now we're kind of in the opposite thing. We're having to fight the battle of trying to keep the brick. So I guess from our perspective, we would like the design review board to approve it as we've submitted it and not have to muddy the waters, if you will, anymore.
Okay, thank you for that. Brian, did you have another comment?
I would like to propose a motion to bring the discussion to a conclusion. So I would propose that we accept the design as presented in the renderings by the owner, and that we not align ourselves with the design reviewers' comments regarding their individual opinion regarding contrast and differentiation. And that would, to me, be a reasonable outcome. So I'm recommending approve the design as presented and to overrule, I guess, the either-or situation given to us by the design reviewer.
I second it.
Okay, so we have a motion on the floor that we would not be accepting staff's recommendation, and instead we will be accepting the design review as in the package that we see here today, which, as they had mentioned, they had already reviewed that and encompassed in the black trim around between the bottom two and then the next four. And so that's the resolution on the floor. So now we can speak to that resolution. Councillor Beck.
David, could you just go back to those design reviewer recommendations? So that the building expression, yeah, so that black line is accomplishing the first recommendation,
It's more than that.
clearly identifying the scale of the lower with its contrasting veneers from a masonry base to a fully metal cladded body and recessed top floor.
Through the chair, Councillor Beck, I guess one could make the interpretation that may be the case here, but what the design reviewer was really getting at here through the recommendations was that there should be a contrasting material on those middle floors, floors 3 to 6, that something other than what's been presented. So some other kind of veneer or facade that would contrast and provide more emphasis to the streetscape levels, floors 1 and 2. So,
But isn't that the second recommendation?
that is, but the first recommendation kind of alludes to that similar idea, that there would be additional contrast provided between floors 1 and 2 and then the middle floors 3 to 6. So.
Okay.
Thank you for that. Any other questions on the resolution? Brian, did you have another question or
Just a comment. If anybody looks out through the windows here in the council chamber, you will see 3 structures or 3 elements that are, let's say, developed by the same owner. And the one building that did receive tremendous disappointment was the Holman Grand, which moved from brick to metal. So I think there's a visual that is very strong that brings to the sort of continuity of the sort of built presence of red brick. And I don't think as much as we architects sometimes like to play with our ideas in our head as to what we believe is how people perceive things. I think this is just one person's opinion, and I don't think we're trying to be critical of the design reviewer. I'm just saying that here today, given the fact that there wasn't clarity in terms of trying to get to something as an alternative that we could all see and judge, I think it's important that we make a decision and make it based upon what I think is only before us now as an option.
Thank you for that, Brian. And I do think that the applicant did add the additional, some of the additional suggestions by putting that black line between the 2 and the 4. So there was, they clearly reviewed that before coming here today with this drawing. So that's the resolution we now have on the floor, moved by Brian, seconded by his worship. Are there any other questions on this resolution?
Yeah, so Madam Chair.
Go ahead, your worship.
If we, look at some other designs, The financial tower on Fitzroy Street. That's the Homburg Tower. So up in the top of is it the third floor? There's a conclave with metal. You go to 80 Grafton Street, which is Key Murray. First 4 floors are brick, and then the top 2 are set back. Then if you go to the corner of Water and Queen, which is Campbell Lee, it's a building that was, I think, put as an add-on to the K's building, so you see the heritage and the new. And I remember a counselor talking about fake heritage. And I said, well, if you go to Quebec, old Quebec, they are starting to bring in the sort of the newer design, because 100 years from now, the heritage enthusiasts would be looking and wondering what was the design back 100 years ago, instead of going back 200 or 300. So I think we're evolving, and I think this design is evolving. I'm glad that Brian Gillis did say we're following what you're going to be proposing, which is a mixture, and I think it's a good mixture. The brick is there. It is a historic street. Great George Street is, the terminus is Province House, where the federal government, through Parks Canada, spending close to $150 million. But, heritage cost, there's a cost to it. I believe in Ottawa, Parliament Hill, the renovations, restoration they're doing there, they're looking at $1 billion, maybe $1.5 billion. So that's why I agree with this project. And if you look at the step backs, and David, I think that's what came up at our public meeting on the 10th, about not the review, it was more about where are the setbacks. Well, if you look at the financial tower on Fitzroy Street, the step back is a sidewalk. If you go to 80 Grafton, which is 6 stories, the step back is a sidewalk. So again, we have to look at our downtown as going up and staying away from the waterfront and going up, or going out to the north end of the city in Winslow and going up. Or going out, I should say. We have to go up instead of out. So I'm fully supporting this, and I think it's a great design, so. Question called.
Okay, question called. All those in favor? Mary?
Yes.
Okay, so that's a unanimous decision to support this resolution. Now, just for clarity, because we've not supported staff's recommendation, this has to move on to council for final decision. Is that correct, David?
Through the chair, that's correct, and we'll be going to council regardless for the site specifics, so these will be both in front of council collectively, yeah.
Oh, so it won't be 2 separate resolutions to council?
It would be separate resolutions, but
Okay.
we would deal with them at the same meeting, is what I'm trying to say, yeah.
Gotcha.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
okay. All right. Well, thank you for that, and thank you, folks, for coming in. Okay. Okay. Okay, yep, sure. So we're moving on to our second application, 75 Kent Street, and we have Laurel Palmer Thompson here to present the application. Over to you, Laurel.
Members of Design Review Board. This is an application for 75 Kent Street, PID number 343525. And it's a request to review and approve a design for renovations and additions to the Rod Hotel. This is the site map, so there is a small addition to the east side of the building, and then the larger addition is to the 5th floor. This is some concept drawings showing the addition, which was the east side and then the upper 5th floor. And the project, it's largely a restoration project, so it's replacement of all windows, returning to the original profile, which is right here. You'll notice there's 6/6, what they're replacing them with. The original, I'm just going to flip back, is they're 1/1. The brick repair and repointing and cleaning, so all the brick on the building has been, is going to be, and a portion of it has already been repointed and cleaned and repaired. There's replacement of architectural details on the building and replacement of the urns that sit at the top of the building. So they're repairing some of these urns and replacing them. The three major changes are the dining room addition. There's on the east side, you'll see here. And the design reviewer recommended an 18-inch drop in parapet walls versus 3.5-foot drop to accommodate view out from the top level. So you'll notice these parapets in the original design, they were higher. They were recommended at 3.5 feet to drop down. The reviewer has only recommended an 18-inch drop. So these are some of the concept drawings. Sorry, my mouse is getting away from me. This is the, oh my goodness. There we go. There's the addition to the east side, and I'll talk about that in a little bit later. Another view of the east side from Kent Street. And you'll see that it was added on to kind of mimic the a previous addition on West Street, on the west side of the building. So the upper 5th level. Another view. And the elevations of the building. So the design reviewer comments, mass and scale, it was recommended that the parapet is lowered to 3'6" instead of the 2'6". Visually, this will create a cleaner break from old to new as viewed from the street, as the glass railings behind will not be visible from the street. The bas reliefs can be lowered, but this will retain a smaller brick field between the windows on the 4th floor and the panels. It's recommended that the curved parapets are not lowered at all to keep the proportional relationship between the two taller center block and these curved brackets. The urns on the corners of the building are also to be lowered, so they do not stand in a taller section of the parapet on the corners, as shown in the northwest corner of the parapet. And this would break the clean, simple parapet line around the building that the designers intended. The exception to this is the urns at the bottom of the curved parapets. They are to remain where they currently sit. The curved parapets have been damaged and detailing is missing. You'll see the inset panels, and it would be positive to move to repair and restore these elements of the design. So I'll just flip back just to kind of explain this a bit more. So what the reviewer is saying that these bas reliefs, you'll see that they're sitting right on top of the windows. He's recommending that they leave a course of bricks in between that relief and the window. I'm going to flip back to the original picture of the building, and you'll see here that with the relief, the bas relief, there's a row of brick in between the top of the window and this relief. The reviewer is recommending that that be lowered down, but still leave a course of brick in between the two. These urns on the end, they're recommending that they be lowered so that they remain the same height as the parapet, and then these would remain where they are, not to alter the curved portion of the building. So for windows, the reviewer did say it was unclear if the replacement of the room windows is within the scope of the project, but when replacement happens, going back to the original 6/6 configuration is encouraged and applauded, and they are in already, some of them have been worked on. There's a conflict in the drawings where the 2D front elevations that show the existing and proposed work show 6/6 over 1 windows. So he just wanted to make note that these are not appropriate for the hotel in the Georgian character, but it is going to be 6 over 6. So I just wanted to confirm that with the board. So materials and finishes, it's recommended, I'm having mouse problems today, I'm sorry. It is recommended that the cladding of the exterior walls of the 5th floor are either wood, potentially stained cedar to match the soffits, or metal that does not have a wood grain finish, or any finish that replicates another material. Red, warm, stained cedar for the walls would be a harmonious and subtle continuation of the coloring of the red brick and would help the addition to recede and be subordinate to the brick below. I did speak to the architect because in the email that was included in the package, he didn't talk about material finishes, but I did confirm that they would feel that it was acceptable to go to a metal siding that didn't replicate any other material. They didn't want to go with a wood cladding because they felt that the location on the building with the weather conditions, wood would be problematic. So the final comments, although the building is not a listed heritage resource, the additions follow the standards and guidelines for the conservation of historic places in Canada, which is the benchmark for all work on historic assets in Canada. Standard 11 of the standard specifically states, conserve the heritage value and character defining elements when creating any new additions to an historic place or any related new construction. Make the new work physically and visually compatible with subordinate to and distinguishable from historic place. The proposed additions successfully employ this approach, do not detract from the original character of the building, and will enhance and freshen the hotel for continued relevant use, as well as serve as a positive example of how traditional buildings can be updated and added to a 21st century way, while complementing and thoughtfully contrasting with the original. And I recommend approval of the design, provided consideration of the recommendations for the parapets and the 5th floor exterior wall material choices. So that was the design reviewer's final comments. Staff are supporting the design reviewer's recommendation, supporting the project subject to the design reviewer's recommendation. So if there's any questions, I'm happy to try and address them.
Thank you. So are you saying that staff is recommending all of their recommendations or just one?
No, all of them. So all of the recommendations that the design reviewer spoke about, we received an email from the architect, and he also spoke to the Rods, and they are in agreement to those recommendations. The only thing that wasn't included in the email was the material cladding for the 5th floor, but I did contact the architect, and they are in agreement with the design reviewer. They didn't want to use a wood, like there was 2 options given. So there was either a wood cladding or a metal cladding that didn't mimic another type of material, because the material that they showed in the concept drawings was a metal but mimicked a wood material. They've agreed to use a metal that's just basically a plain metal, doesn't mimic another material, which is what the standards say in the 500 lot guidelines.
Yeah, okay, thank you for that. Does anyone have any questions? Go ahead, Councillor Peck.
No question. I think it looks great. I think it's awesome. It's going to enhance your view there from your office as well when you're sitting in your planning department down there looking out at that brand new beautiful building.
I don't have a view.
Someone has a nice view.
Someone has a view.
So where the design reviewer said they wanted, after the windows were replaced, they wanted another row of brick put in? Like it
No.
was originally? There was no brick in the original drawing, and then they said they wanted the brick put back in?
Can you pull the drawings back up, Jason?
So the windows were 1 over 1, and now they're 6 over 6, or whatever term you used for that? Two separate what?
2 separate issues, yeah. So I'll try and explain this a bit. Okay, so if you see the original windows,
Yep.
they're a 1 over 1. What they're suggesting now is, so the panes of glass are 1/1. If you look at what they're proposing, there's 6, and where it's divided with this mutton bar, there's 6 below. So previously, it was 1/1.
Yep.
I think the windows that are currently in it are probably not the original windows, would you say, Brian? So they're being replaced with these windows that are more traditional. It's more of a restoration to what the building would have originally looked like. If you see this line, this parapet line, this gray line, originally that was higher. So on the original building, you'll see this is up here. So the roof, and then you have this bas relief. The window falls below. Now, do you see this line of brick that falls between the bas relief, which are these panels, and the window?
Yeah.
So what the design reviewer is saying, in that previous picture, that parapet was lowered, so that bas relief sat right on top of the window. What he's saying is he's agreeing to lower it, but don't lower it so much that you completely get rid of that course of brick. He's recommending that you still leave like 1 course of brick or 2 courses, I think is how you would describe it.
So that's what my question was. So they've agreed to that too?
They have agreed to that.
Okay, because it looks like most of the work is done over there, but,
The bas relief hasn't been replaced yet.
okay. Okay. All right.
So these pieces will go back in at a later date.
Okay. All right. So, yes. Okay. So we have, Counselor Beck has moved to accept staff's recommendation to accept the design reviewer's recommendations to be applied to the application. Seconded by,
I'll second that.
okay, thank you, Mary. Brian was one step ahead of you there.
Okay.
Yeah. So the resolution is on the floor. Any questions? No questions? All those in favor? Okay.
Yes.
Anybody opposed? Okay, and Mary is in favor as well. Okay, well, thank you for that. Okay, any introduction of new business? Seeing none, a motion to adjourn. Moved by Jackie, seconded by Councillor McCabe. All those in favor? Thank you and have a great afternoon.